Ladies and gentlemen, emotional detachment is not about becoming cold, numb, or unfeeling. Rather, it's a powerful form of emotional self-regulation that helps you maintain your inner peace in the face of chaos, conflict, or emotional dependency. In the context of your journey to find inner peace, emotional detachment becomes a spiritual and psychological anchor that allows you to experience life without being overwhelmed by it. At its core, emotional detachment is the conscious decision to stop absorbing the emotional turmoil around you. It's about drawing a clear line between your emotions and the emotions of others. This doesn't mean you stop caring, it means you stop carrying what isn't yours to bear. Many people feel drained, anxious, or even resentful simply because they're too emotionally entangled in other people's drama, opinions, or behaviors. Emotional detachment is the first step toward reclaiming that energy. One of the main reasons emotional detachment leads to inner peace is that it frees you from emotional dependency. Often, we tie our sense of happiness or worth to how others treat us. We become emotionally dependent on someone else's approval, attention, or love. But when you detach, you reclaim your emotional autonomy. You begin to understand that your feelings are your responsibility, and you no longer hand that power over to someone else. Detachment also brings clarity. When you are too emotionally invested in a person or situation, your judgment becomes clouded. You react instead of respond. And you get triggered easily, and you find yourself in emo turmoil for hours or even days. With emotional detachment, you create space between stimulus and response. That space allows you to choose peace over chaos, grace over reaction. To detach emotionally, the first step is self-awareness. You must begin to observe your emotional triggers. When someone says something that upsets you, ask yourself why it affects you so deeply. Is it hitting a wound from your past? Is it challenging a belief you've tied your identity to? By questioning your reactions, you start to loosen the grip they have on you. Next, practice mindful disengagement. This means learning to step back emotionally during difficult conversations or conflicts. You can listen, understand, and even empathize without becoming emotionally charged. You don't need to mirror the other person's emotions. Instead, become the calm presence in the room. This shift in energy not only protects your peace but often diffuses the emotional intensity of the situation. Setting boundaries is another critical component. You cannot detach emotionally if you constantly allow others to overstep their limits in your life. Boundaries are not walls, they are filters. They help you decide what is worth your emotional investment and what is not. Saying no, walking away from toxic conversations, and protecting your time and energy are all acts of emotional detachment. Importantly, letting go is a powerful spiritual element of emotional detachment. Sometimes you have to let go of people, outcomes, or expectations that no longer serve your peace. This doesn't mean you've failed or given up. It means you've evolved. You've realized that holding on too tightly is a form of suffering. Emotional detachment doesn't happen overnight. It requires conscious, daily practice. But as you begin to master it, you'll notice your anxiety decrease, your relationships improve, and your energy return. You'll stop reacting to every small inconvenience or harsh word. You'll feel grounded in yourself, rather than being tossed around by the emotions of others. Ultimately, emotional detachment is a gift you give yourself. It is the path to inner peace, emotional resilience, and deep personal freedom. When you learn to let go with love, watch without judgment, and stand without attachment, you begin to live life on your own peaceful terms. And that's a powerful place to be. Inner peace is the ultimate destination for anyone seeking emotional detachment. It's not the absence of emotions, but rather the ability to remain grounded, centered, and calm regardless of what is happening around you. In a world that constantly demands your attention, reactions, and emotional investment, cultivating inner peace through emotional detachment becomes a life-saving practice. So, what exactly is inner peace? It's the quiet confidence that comes from knowing that you are in control of your internal world. It means no longer being at the mercy of other people's moods, toxic relationships, or external chows. It is freedom from overthinking, anxiety, and the emotional roller coasters that drain your energy and joy. When you learn to detach emotionally, you create the space necessary for this peace to exist and thrive. One of the biggest obstacles to inner peace is emotional entanglement. Many people unknowingly take on the emotional burdens of others, whether through guilt, people-pleasing, or codependency. When someone else is angry, they feel responsible. When someone withdraws, they chase. When conflict arises, they internalize it as a personal failure. These patterns are exhausting and leave little room for peace. Emotional detachment breaks these patterns by teaching you to honor others' experiences without absorbing them as your own. To find inner peace, you must begin by releasing the need to control everything. Emotional detachment does not mean you stop caring. It means you understand the limits of your responsibility. You begin to recognize what is yours to manage, your thoughts, your responses, your actions, and what is not, other people's emotions, opinions, and decisions. This shift in focus is where peace begins to bloom. Another critical component is learning to observe rather than absorb. When you detach emotionally, you step into the role of a witness. Instead of reacting to every triggering moment, you pause, breathe, and choose how to respond. This mindfulness creates an emotional buffer, a sacred space between you and the chaos. In this space, peace lives. Let's not forget the role of self-awareness in cultivating inner peace. Emotional detachment requires you to check in with yourself regularly. What are you feeling and why? Are you carrying tension that doesn't belong to you? Are you replaying conversations in your head that steal your serenity? By getting honest with yourself, you can begin to let go of what no longer serves you. Boundaries also play a vital role. Inner peace cannot survive without clear boundaries. Saying no, limiting contact with energy-draining people, and protecting your time are not selfish. They are necessary. Every time you enforce a boundary, you reinforce your commitment to peace. Also, remember the importance of letting go. Letting go of expectations, grudges, the need to be right, or the desire to change others. Holding on creates inner turbulence. Letting go allows your mind and heart to settle. When you detach emotionally from outcomes and attachments, you allow life to flow naturally, which brings profound peace. Ultimately, inner peace is a choice. It's something you cultivate, not something you wait to stumble upon. Emotional detachment is the vehicle that gets you there. Through intentional practices like mindfulness, self-reflection, and boundary setting, you begin to shift your emotional focus inward. Instead of chasing validation, reacting to drama, or over-investing in external circumstances, you turn your attention to your internal world, and that's where true peace resides. In summary, emotional detachment is not about coldness or apathy. It's about reclaiming your emotional sovereignty. It's about choosing to no longer be a sponge for chaos. When you master this, you unlock a quiet strength within, a stillness that becomes your refuge in every storm. That stillness, that strength, is what we call inner peace. One of the most essential tools in learning how to emotionally detach and find inner peace is the conscious creation and enforcement of boundaries. Boundaries are not walls. They are bridges to healthy relationships with both yourself and others. They are clear guidelines that help you protect your energy, your values, and your emotional well-being. When you struggle with emotional attachment, it often stems from blurred or non-existent boundaries. You may feel overly responsible for other people's emotions, absorb their moods, or feel guilty for saying no. Without boundaries, you are left emotionally exposed, constantly reacting, overgiving, and living in a state of emotional exhaustion. This kind of entanglement robs you of inner peace. Setting boundaries is an act of self-respect. It is you telling the world, this is what I need to feel safe, balanced, and whole. Boundaries protect your mental and emotional space from being hijacked by others. They give you the breathing room to reflect, recharge, and respond with clarity instead of reacting from a place of emotional chaos. For example, if someone is constantly unloading their drama onto you, a boundary might beg, I care about you, but I can't always be the one to carry your problems. I need space to focus on my own well-being. By communicating this respectfully but firmly, you reclaim your energy. You teach people how to treat you, not through anger or withdrawal, but through conscious limits. Boundaries also play a crucial role in emotional detachment. When you enforce healthy boundaries, you begin to emotionally separate yourself from situations that are outside your control. You stop trying to fix, rescue, or over-explain. Instead, you observe without absorbing. You listen without losing yourself. This distance, this emotional buffer, helps you remain anchored in your own truth and peace. One of the biggest challenges people face when learning to set boundaries is the fear of rejection or conflict. But avoiding boundaries to keep others comfortable often leads to your own discomfort. Over time, resentment builds. You feel unheard, unseen, and depleted. Ironically, by trying to preserve connection, you lose your connection to yourself. That's why clarity is power. Boundaries aren't about making others change. They're about changing how you show up. When you become clear on what you will and will not tolerate, you stop being controlled by other people's chaos. You begin to take ownership of your emotional experience. Boundaries also support inner peace by giving you time and space for self-care, reflection, and rest. When you stop overcommitting, stop saying yes when you mean no, and stop allowing guilt to dictate your decisions, you create a more peaceful internal environment. Your nervous system calms down, your mind becomes quieter, your emotions become less reactive. That calm, quiet confidence, that's inner peace. Setting boundaries is not a one-time event, it's a practice. It requires consistency, self-awareness, and sometimes the courage to have uncomfortable conversations. But over time, as you strengthen your boundaries, you'll notice a shift. You'll feel more in control of your energy. You'll begin to detach from toxic dynamics without guilt. And most importantly, you'll create space for the kind of emotional balance that leads to lasting peace. In the journey of emotional detachment, boundaries are your guideposts. They remind you of where you end and where someone else begins. They keep your emotional energy aligned with your values. And ultimately, they lead you to a state of inner peace, where you no longer feel responsible for everyone's happiness and can finally focus on your own. One of the most effective and transformative practices for emotional detachment and achieving inner peace is mindfulness. In a world where emotional chaos is often the norm, where we're reacting to texts, news, social media, and people's energy, mindfulness helps you reclaim control over your inner world. It teaches you how to respond instead of react, observe instead of absorb, and release instead of attach. At its core, mindfulness is the practice of becoming deeply present with your thoughts, emotions, and surroundings without judgment. When you're mindful, you're no longer lost in the past or worried about the future. You become aware of what's happening in the now, and that awareness is the doorway to inner peace. Emotional detachment doesn't mean shutting down or becoming cold. It means learning how to observe your emotions without letting them dominate you. Mindfulness gives you that ability. It creates a mental and emotional space between a trigger and your response. For example, when someone says something that would normally hurt you or make you angry, mindfulness helps you pause and witness your emotion instead of reacting impulsively. Through mindfulness, you realize that you are not your emotions. You are the one observing them. This subtle shift changes everything. It puts you back in the seat of power. Instead of being swept away by emotional waves, you learn how to surf them. You begin to see that feelings are temporary visitors, not permanent residents. They rise and fall like the tide, and mindfulness helps you stay grounded while they pass. One of the biggest reasons people struggle to detach emotionally is because they are entangled in mental stories, fears, expectations, what-ifs, and replaying conversations. Mindfulness quiets that noise. When you bring awareness to your breath, body, or even the sensation of sitting still, you interrupt the emotional loop in your mind. You ground yourself in reality instead of your narrative about reality. Mindfulness also fosters emotional intelligence. When you are fully present, you notice subtle shifts in your mood, your body, and your thought patterns. You begin to recognize the early signs of emotional overwhelm or attachment, can take action before things spiral. You become more self-aware, more self-compassionate, and more in tune with your own emotional boundaries. In relationships, mindfulness helps you observe dynamics more clearly. You begin to see when you're over-investing, rescuing, or attaching too deeply to someone else's moods or opinions. Instead of reacting out of fear, guilt, or a desire to please, mindfulness gives you space to act from clarity. This emotional clarity is the foundation of detachment. You can love someone and still not lose yourself. You can support others without absorbing their pain. And you can walk away from what doesn't serve you with peace rather than resentment. Cultivating mindfulness doesn't require perfection. It simply requires presence. You can practice it through meditation, deep breathing, mindful walking, or even pausing during the day to check in with yourself. The more often you return to the present moment, the more natural emotional detachment becomes. Ultimately, a mindfulness leads to inner peace because it anchors you in the truth that you are enough as you are right now. You don't need to fix everyone. You don't need to control outcomes. You don't need to chase external validation. You are allowed to be still, to feel your emotions without being consumed by them, and to let go of attachments that disturb your inner world. In a chaotic, emotionally charged world, mindfulness is your anchor. It helps you detach not by turning your back on emotion, but by facing it with calm awareness. And in that stillness, you discover the inner peace that has always been within you, waiting for your attention. Letting go is one of the most crucial, yet most challenging, the steps on the journey to emotional detachment and inner peace. It involves releasing control, expectations, attachments, and emotional burdens that no longer serve your well-being. At its essence, letting go is not about giving up. It's about creating space for clarity, healing, and freedom. It is the act of honoring your emotions, learning from them, and then setting them free so you can move forward without being held hostage by the past. And when you're emotionally entangled in situations or relationships, your peace becomes dependent on things outside your control. Maybe it's a person who won't reciprocate your efforts, a past mistake you keep replaying, or a future outcome you obsessively worry about. These attachments drain your energy and trap you in cycles of anxiety, resentment, or grief. Letting go is the conscious choice to release those emotional chains and trust that your peace matters more than holding on. One of the biggest misconceptions about letting go is that it requires closure or someone else's permission. In truth, letting go begins and ends with you. You don't need an apology to heal. You don't need them to understand. You don't even need everything to make sense. What you need is the courage to prioritize your mental and emotional health above the need to cling to what's already run its course. Letting go means accepting reality as it is, not as you wish it would be. Acceptance doesn't mean agreement. It means recognizing that some things are out of your control. And peace is found not by fixing them, but by releasing your emotional grip on them. When you accept that some relationships end, some people don't change, and some questions go unanswered, you begin to make peace with life it is. That's when emotional detachment becomes possible. Not through coldness or indifference, but through conscious surrender. Letting go also requires trust in yourself, in the process, and in the idea that releasing what's weighing you down will lead to something better. Often we hold on out of fear of the unknown, fear of loneliness, fear that we won't find anything better. But letting go is an act of faith. Faith that what's meant for you will find you, and what's hurting you is not meant to stay. One powerful tool for letting go is self-compassion. Be kind to yourself as you release emotional attachments. Understand that it's okay to grieve, to miss people, or to feel sadness even as you choose to move on. Emotions are not signs of weakness. They're signs that you cared. But letting go means choosing not to let those emotions control you anymore. It means carrying the lesson, not the pain. Letting go also involves boundaries, mental, emotional, and sometimes physical. You may need to distance yourself from people who repeatedly hurt you, disengage from situations that rob you of peace, or stop trying to change what you cannot control. These boundaries aren't walls. They're bridges to freedom. They help you protect your space and reclaim your power. The beauty of letting go is that it creates room for healing. It allows your mind to quiet, your heart to soften, and your spirit to rise. It creates the emotional space where inner peace can take root and grow. When you let go of what longer serves you, you align with what does. Peace, clarity, self-respect, and freedom. In the end, letting go is not a single moment. It's a daily practice. It's choosing again and again to release what you cannot change, to forgive where you can, and to prioritize peace over control. It's in this practice that emotional detachment is born, not from a place of resistance, but from the quiet power of surrender. And in that surrender, you'll find the stillness and inner peace your soul has been longing for. Self-awareness is the foundation for emotional detachment and a gateway to lasting inner peace. It is the conscious knowledge of your own thoughts, feelings, behaviors, And triggers. When you become self-aware, you no longer react impulsively to emotional situations. Instead, you begin to respond with clarity, intention, and wisdom. Detaching emotionally does not mean becoming cold or indifferent. Rather, it means understanding your emotions deeply enough to no longer let them control you. This level of emotional mastery is impossible without self-awareness. When you're aware of what you're feeling and why, you create a space between stimulus and response, and that space is where peace begins. Most people are caught in emotional autopilot. They react based on habits, past wounds, or subconscious patterns. For example, someone says something that triggers you, and instead of pausing, you lash out or shut down. But when you're self-aware, you pause. You notice your body tightening, your thought racing, or your emotions rising. And in that moment of awareness, you can choose not to be consumed. Self-awareness begins with observation. Ask yourself throughout the day, what am I feeling right now? Why am I reacting this way? What story am I telling myself about this situation? Journaling, mindfulness, meditation, or simply taking 5 minutes to breathe and reflect can help strengthen this skill. The more you practice observing your thoughts without judgment, the more insight you gain into your inner world. One of the greatest benefits of self-awareness is the ability to identify emotional triggers. These are often rooted in past experiences, childhood wounds, failed relationships, or unresolved trauma. When you don't recognize your triggers, they own you. But when you're self-aware, you can see them for what they are, echoes of the past, not reflections of your present truth. For instance, if you find yourself clinging to someone emotionally, self-awareness can help you explore the deeper need behind that attachment. Is it fear of abandonment, a need for validation, loneliness? Once you name it, you can begin to heal it. And that's how emotional detachment starts. Not by suppressing emotion, but by understanding its source and choosing peace over reaction. Self-awareness also leads to better boundaries. When you know yourself, you know what drains you and what feeds you. You can walk away from emotionally toxic situations without guilt. You can stop taking responsibility for others' feelings. You begin to see that your peace is your responsibility, and no one else's. Another powerful aspect of self-awareness is recognizing how much energy you give to people or situations that don't give back. Often, we stay emotionally entangled with people who confuse us, manipulate us, or keep us in cycles of hope and disappointment. But with self-awareness, you can step back and ask, is this worth my peace? That simple question can change your life. Letting go of emotional dependence requires understanding that you are whole on your own. Self-awareness brings you back to yourself. It teaches you that your worth is not determined by who stays, who approves, or who understands you. You begin to detach not because you don't care, but because you finally do. Care enough about your well-being to let go of what harms it. In the end, self-awareness empowers you to live with greater authenticity and presence. You become less reactive, more grounded, and more in tune with your own needs. The world may stay chaotic, people may still disappoint, but you no longer ride every emotional wave. Instead, you remain centered in your truth, anchored in your peace, and aware of your power. So, if you want to detach emotionally and find inner peace, start within. Start by knowing yourself, deeply, honestly, and compassionately. Because self-awareness isn't just the first step to emotional freedom, it is the freedom. Healing is at the heart of emotional detachment and the key to finding lasting inner peace. When we talk about emotional detachment, we are not talking about shutting off or becoming cold. Rather, we are talking about the ability to heal from emotional wounds so that you no longer feel overwhelmed, dependent, or reactive in situations that once triggered you. Emotional detachment is not the absence of feelings, it's the mastery of them. And healing is how you get there. Many people carry emotional pain from past relationships, unmet expectations, betrayal, rejection, or childhood trauma. These unresolved wounds can trap us in emotional cycles of overthinking, anxiety, fear, and constant attachment to people or outcomes. The reason detachment feels impossible is often because you're still emotionally tied to pain that hasn't been processed. That's why healing is not just helpful, it's essential. Healing begins with acknowledgement. You can't release what you don't recognize. Take time to reflect on what's really keeping you stuck emotionally. Is it a past heartbreak? Is it a need for validation? Is it guilt, shame, or resentment? Emotional pain thrives in silence and suppression. Healing, on the other hand, begins when you shine a light on what hurts and give yourself permission to feel it without judgment. Once you identify the root of your emotional attachment, the next step is to allow yourself to process those feelings. This can be deeply uncomfortable, but it is also liberating. Let yourself cry, journal your thoughts. Speak with a therapist, coach, or trusted friend. Expressing your pain doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're ready to free yourself from its hold. As you move through the healing process, you begin to understand your emotional patterns more clearly. You start to notice what triggers you, what drains you, and where your boundaries have been crossed. Healing allows you to step out of the role of emotional victim and into the role of empowered creator. You begin to realize that your peace is not in someone else's hands, it's in your own. Healing also requires forgiveness, not necessarily for the other person, but for yourself. Forgive yourself for staying too long, for not knowing better, for reacting out of fear. Emotional detachment happens more easily when you are no longer holding on to shame, blame, or regret. Forgiveness is not forgetting what happened. It's choosing to release the emotional weight so you can move forward in peace. Through healing, you also develop compassion for yourself and others. You begin to see that people hurt people from their own unhealed pain. You stop taking everything personally. You understand that just because someone didn't give the love you needed doesn't mean you're unworthy. Healing teaches you to meet your own emotional needs instead of outsourcing your peace to someone else. The beauty of healing is that it brings clarity. When your heart is no longer clouded by emotional chaos, you make decisions that honor your well-being. You stop chasing people who are unavailable. You stop needing external validation. You stop engaging in relationships that cost you your peace. You start choosing what feels aligned, grounded, and safe. Emotional detachment then becomes a byproduct of deep healing. You no longer need to hold on to what once hurt you. You can observe your feelings without being consumed by them. You can love others without losing yourself. You can set boundaries without guilt. You can walk away when necessary, knowing that your peace is sacred. In the end, healing is not about becoming numb. It's about becoming whole. And from that wholeness comes the ability to detach with grace, live with presence, and protect your inner world. If you're on the path to emotional detachment, start with healing. It is not only the key to freedom, it is the bridge to peace. Non-attachment is one of the most powerful principles when it comes to emotional freedom and inner peace. Contrary to what some might think, a non-attachment doesn't mean that you stop caring. It means you care deeply but without clinging, controlling, or depending on outcomes for your happiness. When you practice non-attachment, you create the emotional space needed to find clarity, freedom, and peace within yourself. Regardless of what or who comes and goes in your life, at its core, non-attachment is about understanding that nothing external is permanent. Not people, not situations, not emotions. When you realize this truth, you stop holding on so tightly to what was or what could be. You begin to accept life as it unfolds, rather than trying to force it into your expectations. This acceptance brings an incredible sense of inner peace, because you're no longer resisting reality. You're flowing with it. Many people struggle with emotional detachment because they equate love with attachment. But attachment is rooted in fear. Fear of loss, fear of rejection, fear of not being enough. Love in its truest form is not possession, it's presence. When you love someone from a place of non-attachment, you love them without needing to control them, fix them, or make them stay. You give them the freedom to be who they are, and you give yourself the freedom to remain whole, no matter what they choose. Non-attachment also applies to your thoughts and emotions. Emotional suffering often arises not from what happens to us, but from the stories we attach to those experiences. For example, getting ignored by someone you care about is painful. But it's the attachment to the thought, "I must not be worthy," or "I'll never be loved," that turns pain into prolonged suffering. When you practice non-attachment, you allow yourself to feel emotions without getting lost in them. You observe the feeling, acknowledge it, and let it pass, like a wave, rather than a storm. Practicing non-attachment requires self-awareness. It means recognizing when you're clinging to something, A person, an outcome, a belief, and asking yourself, is this helping me grow or is it holding me back? It's a practice of pausing, breathing, and choosing presence over obsession. This doesn't happen overnight, but the more you do it, the more natural it becomes. One of the most powerful outcomes of non-attachment is emotional resilience. When you're not emotionally dependent on others for your worth, you bounce back more quickly from setbacks and disappointments. You don't fall apart when someone doesn't meet your expectations, because your peace is rooted in your own being, not in external validation. Non-attachment is also closely linked to trust. You begin to trust the flow of life, trusting that what is meant for you will stay, and what isn't will fall away. You let go of forcing and begin to live in alignment, and in that space of surrender, you find something extraordinary: peace. Not the temporary peace that comes from getting your way, but the lasting peace that comes from being in harmony with the present moment. To detach yourself emotionally and find inner peace, start by embracing non-attachment as a daily mindset. Meditate, journal. Reflect on what you might be gripping too tightly, and gently loosen your hold. Choose to show up with an open heart, but without tying your happiness to the outcomes. Over time, you'll notice that the less you chase peace outside of you, the more it arises from within. Non-attachment is not indifference, it is wisdom. It is the art of living with love and freedom hand in hand. And once you master it, you'll no longer be emotionally imprisoned by your fears or attachments. Instead, you'll experience the calm, centered presence that true inner peace offers.